This is the second part of my two videos showing you how to do the capbordy Moebius cast on. In the first video I showed you the actual cast on and since then what I've done is cast on all the stitches that I need, 120, which is really 240 altogether, and I've distributed them around both the needles, both the needle tips, so that I can actually get the tips of the needles ready to start knitting. It's really important that you do that and that you're ready to knit when you've established your Moebius, because otherwise you can get another twist in there. So I've moved everything up to the middle. I've got the stitches fairly evenly distributed. They're not really, they don't really look like stitches at the moment because they're just wraps. But this is one of the key parts of knitting a Moebius, is establishing this twist, this one twist. Because what's going to happen is that the Moebius is going to grow from the centre outwards. So it only has one side, it only has one edge, and that's a function of having this one twist in the Moebius strip. So what I do then is I set it down on a table and I spend some time carefully examining it to make sure that apart from the place where there is the one crossover, it isn't twisted anywhere else. So I'm going to go anti-clockwise and I'm making sure that the cable and the needle are parallel to each other. One isn't lying on top of the other that way. So they are parallel, and here my two lines of cable are parallel, and if you've got a lot of stitches you might just want to have a look in between to make sure that they're still parallel. And then at this point here you can see that the cable is crossed, so this is the one twist that I'm after. If I go further along I just want to make sure I only have one, and I do have one, so that's my Moebius twist and I'm now ready to knit. So I'm going to go back to knitting with my wool on the right hand side. We cast on with it on the left, and that's my yarn over which finished the end of the cast on. So now I'm going to put a stitch marker onto the right hand needle and I'm going to start knitting. So it will feel really strange, very loose and baggy, but it just gets absorbed into the garment as you work it. So the first stitch that I knit is actually my slip knot, and I'm just going to knit that normally, and then as you work your stitches you'll see that they present to you in a different way each time. So this first stitch, it presents really open, you can see that space here, so I'm going to knit into that space, which effectively means I'm knitting into the back of the loop. So there it is, and then the next stitch looks closed. They're not stitches, they're wraps, but you can see how this one slopes this way, its leg is kind of forward, so I'm just going to knit that one normally. And as I knit them you'll see each one, that's open, so knit into the back of the loop, that's closed, knit it normally, that's open, knit into the back of the loop, that's closed, knit it normally. You only do this in the first round, and it's to untwist those stitches. As you knit, keep on distributing your stitches around your Moebius so that you don't end up with big clumps of stitches, because otherwise it's very difficult for the cable to kind of stay in place. It will try and resist you at this point and it will feel stiff, as if it's kind of springy, and it is actually under a lot of tension here. So you keep on knitting, and about every 5 or 6 stitches or so I'll just have a little regroup and move everything round again so that it relaxes. And this round is awkward, it's a little bit tricky, but it's the only part apart from the cast on of a Moebius that is remotely difficult. The rest is really straightforward. So if we look at what's happening here, we've got a line of knitting with our stitch marker here, and the next time you see this stitch marker you'll be halfway round round one. It will be hanging on the cable between your needle tips, so don't be tempted to think I must have made a mistake, I've finished the round but why isn't the stitch marker on the needle tips. It's normal. As your Moebius grows you won't be aware of it until you meet it again on the needle tip and you slip it back onto here to start the next round. So you've only finished a round of a Moebius when you can physically move the stitch marker from one needle tip to the other, and at that point you're then going to do whatever it says in your pattern you do for the second round and so on of your Moebius. I usually design Moebiuses to be either reversible, so if it was garter stitch, the next round would be purl, and then it would be knit again, or I have a stitch that I like the back of as much as I like the front, because because it's crossed over, you will see the front and the back. Two interesting things happen during this first round. One is that this open and closed characteristic of the stitches that we see here will become less pronounced when you've done half a round. So when that stitch marker is here and you start the second half of round one, the stitches will still look open, but much less open. So continue to knit them through the back of the loop, and then continue to knit the other stitches, which will look like normal knitting through the front of the loop. You only do this in round one. The other thing that happens is when you get to the halfway point, so the stitch marker's here on the cable and you're just about to start the second half of the round, everything becomes a bit more relaxed, the cable starts to feel a bit more relaxed, and when you finish the whole round, it is really relaxed and the knitting is really straightforward. So it's just this first round of knitting that is really tricky. This would also be the round in which you would adjust your stitch numbers to make the pattern work if it didn't happen to be a multiple of 2. That's it.